Andrew, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Danica Di Giorgio, filling in this evening for Sharri. But first, we talk a lot about youth crime, but we're going to keep talking about it because this is a crisis like we have never seen before. A new report has revealed the number of young criminals in Queensland jumped 5.2% between 2022 to 23 to more than 11,000 offenders. And here is a breakdown of the numbers, and it will shock you. 11 juveniles were charged with murder. There were just under 11,000 break-ins by 10 to 17-year-olds. 55% of break-ins, car thefts and robberies were committed by children. That's more than half of overall crime for that period. About 1,300 robberies committed by juveniles. And get this, just over 4,000 sexual assaults by juveniles, 500 were sexual offences. Quite frankly, that is unacceptable. What is going on? That is a huge increase in crime rates and should worry everyone. We are talking children as young as 10. Unbelievable. And have a look at this video obtained by 2GB showing a food delivery driver allegedly being attacked by a mob of youths. The group are accused of throwing glass bottles at the man and assaulting him. And as you could see in that video, he tried to run away, but was clearly outnumbered. A local resident said he saw the group sitting there most of the night drinking vodka before bragging that they had allegedly stomped on their victim. And this is happening in inner Sydney. Just last week, a terrified nurse said she feared she would be killed when a group of youths, some aged just 11, allegedly tried to carjack her at knife point in Darwin.
Police, there is a kid threatening a lady with a knife, and they're stealing her car right now at Darwin City.
The victim, Anu Chapane, told The Australian that she felt betrayed after a group of 4 male youths allegedly attempted to steal her car. One came within a metre of her with a knife, as you can just see there. That's pretty close. And a rock was pelted at her car window. She said she was so scared she thought she was having a heart attack. Now, the sad part of all this is that it probably comes as no surprise. We have become so used to hearing about young kids involved in serious and shocking crimes. But enough is enough. What is it going to take for an all-encompassing approach to put an end to the madness? Political leaders federally and at state and territory levels, parents, educators, youth leaders. We need urgent leadership from all ends. Because right now, we're just not getting it. And despite those shocking Queensland statistics, youth detention as a last resort could be scrapped, would you believe it? Youth crime has soared under Stephen Miles's watch, yet he couldn't even guarantee when questioned on Sky News this morning that he won't change the laws.
Will you remove detention as a last resort, yes or no?
We'll have changes to the laws before the Parliament next week, but more importantly, we will continue to invest more in the programs that we know are working.
When you say there will be changes to laws, does that mean you will remove detention as a last resort?
Look, I'm not going to get into what the laws next week will be.
It doesn't fill you with much hope that he knows what he's doing here. And we know just how seriously he takes youth crime.
Queensland Media Club would have been noted by more than a few, including the people of those communities. Premier, I'm sure you can see the last 2 summers have been bookended by the murders of young mother Emma Lovell and just 3 days ago grandmother Vilene White.
Smirking, giggling. It's no laughing matter. And not enough is being done in New South Wales either. 2 teenagers today became the first to be charged under radical new laws in the state targeting youth posting their crimes online after the pair allegedly stole luxury cars and uploaded footage of the thefts to social media. But post and boast laws are not enough. This is nothing more than a band-aid solution. It's not getting to the root cause of what is causing this crisis. These kids should be at home, at school, playing sport, having fun, learning and reading, yet they're terrifying suburbs, ransacking homes and breaking into cars. It's time to get to the bottom of what is causing this. Is it parenting, social media? Is it education? And what role does the justice system play? Concerningly, Queensland magistrates have granted bail to young offenders against the request of police in about 2/3 of cases in the past 18 months. No wonder we've got a problem here. It is time to get serious and urgently before more lives are destroyed and innocent people are killed. Also coming up tonight, Anthony Albanese wages a war with Elon Musk as his censorship push heats up, plus Anzac Day hijacked by pro-Palestinian activists. And the worst part is, they're teachers. But first, let's bring in my panel, former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, and One Nation Chief of Staff, James Ashby. Hi to you both. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. James, we'll start with you, obviously, in Queensland. How worried are you about those statistics? Have we reached a crisis point when it comes to youth crime?
No, we haven't reached the crisis point yet. It's only getting worse. Every 6 months, the figures just get worse and worse and worse. And I've had 3 attempts of break-ins, both on my car and on my house here, where I live on the Capricorn Coast. And this is, the daily occurrence that people have got. And you can put all the security cameras up that you want, but all you get is a token of their visits, whether they break in, whether they're successful or not. And this is leaving residents of not just Queensland, but the entire country worried about their safety. Kids today have all the rights, but zero responsibility. And in Queensland here, we've only got 306 detention centre beds. So when you've got over 10,000 offenders being hauled before the courts, there is very little option left for a magistrate other than to release them because there aren't the beds available. We know that a lot of these kids that are performing the break and enters on repeated homes, stealing cars time and time again, the coppers know who they are. A lot of them are living in residential care, and that is wards of the state effectively here in Queensland. So the government are on the hook on so many levels. And what's so disappointing in this state, Danica, is the fact that our insurance premiums continue to go up, and yet the state government are clipping the ticket along the way because we are hit with a 9% stamp duty on our insurance rates. Wow. So when my house insurance went up almost $3,000, the state government clipped the ticket an extra $300. So crime does pay. It pays the state government and they're doing nothing to solve the problem.
No, and you raised a good point there. I mean, they are repeat offenders because they're going in and out of the system, Bronwyn. But what's the solution to this? What can we do now to put an end to the madness?
Well, there's got to be a principle, and that is the consequences for the perpetrator has got to be commensurate with the fear and pain of the victim. Mm-hmm. At the moment, those kids have no consequences from what they do at all. And as long as that goes, you will see the crime figures rise. They have to be punished. That's the word, punished. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm remembering back to when Giuliani cleaned up New York. And one of the things he found was it was a small group of people who were actually doing all of the crime, from the small crime to the big crime. And I suspect, I heard someone say the other day that there are so many thousands and thousands of young kids, but there's a really small core group that are doing the real damage. Yeah. Let's find them and let's take them out of circulation and show there are consequences for what happens when you break the law and you cause pain and suffering and loss for victims.
Yeah, spot on. I think it was Mariam Scrimgeour, the only Labor MP up in the Northern Territory, she said recently, we've got to stop treating them like angels. And she was the first person to come out with a spine to say that. So, but it is certainly a problem. Look, let's move on, because in an unexpected turn of events, the horrific Wakely Church attack has sparked a major power play between the Australian Prime Minister and tech billionaire Elon Musk. Musk's refusal to censor content of the alleged terror incident has outraged all sides of the political spectrum and our e-safety commissioner, and has led to a verbal spat between the two leaders, which I've got to say is rather both beneath them. But James, I mean, where is this going? Seriously, once you start going down this censorship route, it doesn't end. How do you feel about it?
Well, I've got a strange feeling there may be a bit of, as you say, tit for tat here, but the e-safety commissioner used to work for Twitter. Is this a grudge that she's holding against Elon Musk as a result of, him buying the service and obviously giving free speech to so many people, allowing Trump back on the platform? And he's certainly released the throttle when it comes to conservative views. But there aren't just Twitter users posting this. It's all over YouTube. The ABC's even responsible for some pretty graphic material when Floyd was killed over in the United States. That's still up there. Why hasn't the e-safety commissioner instructed YouTube to take down that? Why hasn't some of the other social media platforms been targeted the same way as Elon Musk? I have a sneaky suspicion this is a bit of payback from a former Twitter staffer who's now in a very powerful position. And I must just say, the coalition awarded this position and, of course, created the position, and Labor have put in one of their pawns to pull the trigger on one of the biggest billionaires across the country, who really shouldn't be the sole target of this debate.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's gone back and forth for the last 24 hours. Bronwyn, I've got to ask you, though, Peter Dutton has come out and he is broadly supporting a crackdown on social media, on X. What do you think of that? What do you think of the Liberals' support of this?
I think it's the thin edge of the wedge. It really concerns me, because it seems to me it's a real push by Labor, one, to appease the Muslim voters in the Labor seats by saying, well, we can't have this person who's allegedly of Muslim faith being singled out. And I take James's point as well. I am also very concerned about the office of the E-Commissioner, because the E-Commissioner has far too much power. It was an appointment of that particular person by Malcolm Turnbull. That's a worry. But to have someone with that amount of power, I think, is wrong. It's taking power away from the elected members of Parliament, where these sorts of decisions should be made. I think there is a case for a whole rethink about that office at all, because it doesn't seem to be tackling the things it was meant to, like child pornography.
Correct.
Like all the things that really do dreadful damage to children. There's horrible stuff out there, and to go after this, which was a fact, it's news.
It was a fact.
What are we going to do? Take down all the footage of John F. Kennedy being shot?
Correct.
Are we going to take down again the Gaza, what's happening in the Gaza, or what's happening in Israel? Perhaps there was not enough shown of what happened to those Israelis. Because if you don't show it, then people can say it didn't happen.
Exactly. And that can be weaponised as propaganda, and that's when it gets very dangerous.
That's one of the things that Eisenhower said at the end of World War II, when they opened up the concentration camps. He said, document it. So they can't say it didn't happen.
Spot on, spot on. Now, look, this is very concerning, because the teachers and school staff for Palestine Victoria Group is trying to hijack our Anzac history for its own political purposes, calling for the legacy to be dismantled. The group has created an educational resource which aims to rectify the supposed glorified Anzac narrative and instead, quote, enable rigorous, critical and empowering education. James, this is appalling. They are hijacking our history for their own views. What do you think?
Yeah, shame on them. The only material that should be downloaded by any teacher and supplied to kids in schools is from the War Memorial. They've got some fantastic videos that teachers can use, and some terrific material. I was only on there yesterday having a good closer look myself. Yeah, look, this is obviously a very minority group of people trying to achieve this, but you will never, ever, ever destroy the legacy of Anzac Day. We are not glorifying war in any way, shape or form. We are simply paying respect to those people at a very young age who in most cases weren't even of legal age to go over and fight for this country and defend us. But they have left a legacy that we each enjoy today, including those teachers themselves. Shame on them. I hope there's plenty of pushback, including from the Prime Minister, who says we should shut these people down. There's no room for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these activists, Bronwyn, they know no bounds.
No, they don't. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Exactly.
But and it made me seethe with anger, to be honest. You know, when I walked the Kokoda track, one of the things I did was go into the big cemetery in Port Moresby, and I found a headstone of someone who would have been the same age as my father and of the similar rank in the Air Force. And if that had been my father, I would never have been born. We lost 60,000 young men in World War I, 40,000 in World War II, who never had the chance to bring up families, or for many cases to have families. What we do is commemorate their sacrifice. But I've got to say this, let the truth be known. In 1941, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem went to see Hitler. There he is, having a nice meeting with him. When it was agreed that Hitler would support against the Jews and the English, because they hated them both. This man, the Grand Mufti, actually formed a group who fought for the Germans in Bosnia. The ongoing support of fascism, when 6,000 Nazis came into Cairo at the end of World War II to help Nasser fight against the Jews and obliterate them then. Let's hear about what the real truth is. Are we really surprised that the river to the sea mantra goes on today? Are we really surprised? There's a long legacy. There he is.
Well, you've got the picture.
There
you've got
he
the
is.
picture there. Exactly. I just think it's quite offensive, to be honest, in classrooms that, you know, this is our Anzac history. It should be taught. Now, look, former Home Affairs boss Mike Pizzullo admitted on the ABC last night that he made mistakes after his dismissal over text messages that breached the Public Service Code. He said he accepts what happened. This is what he said.
I certainly accept the finding that no matter how much rough and tumble there is in a place like Canberra, that the gaining of influence and the personal advantage to be gained by way of certain channels of communication, whether it's to the Prime Minister or anyone else, crosses a line in terms of conduct. I accept that and I've paid a price.
So he says he accepts it. James, is that enough in your view?
Oh, by all means. Mike, I only ever had a couple of brief encounters with Mike when we were invited into a couple of briefings during the time in which One Nation had that balance of power in the Senate. He was always thorough with his briefings. I think he had while he did have a good relationship with the coalition, he's clearly across his brief. He knows his stuff. It's to Australia's detriment that we've lost him, and full credit to him for admitting he'd made mistakes. But it is to Australia's detriment that we have lost him ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to leave it there. James Ashby, Bronwyn Bishop, good to have you both on. Thank you so much for joining me this evening on the show. Well, stay with us. Coming up, the Albanese government's censorship war takes a turn. National Senator David Littleproud will weigh in. That's next. Welcome back. Well, as we've been reporting, the Prime Minister has picked a fight with billionaire Elon Musk over his refusal to remove videos of the Wakeley Church stabbing off X, formerly known as Twitter. Have a listen.
This bloke thinks he's above the Australian law, that he's above common decency. This bloke on the other side of the world, from his billionaires' establishments, trying to lecture Australians about free speech. Well, I won't cop it and Australians won't either.
And the tech billionaire fired back, mocking Anthony Albanese's social media crackdown hours after X was again ordered to remove graphic content with that post. Joining me now is Nationals leader David Littleproud. Thanks for joining us this evening. What is your position on this?
Yeah, look, I think some common sense needs to prevail. I think we all have a responsibility of enjoying freedom of speech, but with that comes responsibility, and responsibility of ensuring that real violence shouldn't be put up on platforms where particularly young children can access to. We need to make sure that real violence doesn't actually normalise stylised violence. And I think as platform owners, particularly like Elon Musk, I wholeheartedly support him in the fact that there should be a freedom of speech. But with that comes a responsibility, a severe responsibility of making sure that there shouldn't be censorship. But when it comes to real violence that Australians have endured has created great trauma, just some common sense should prevail, and that shouldn't be put out on any platform, because this is where, unfortunately, we've seen this slip in societal standards. And I think we've got a responsibility as we go close to Anzac Day. Over 100,000 Australians have lost their lives defending our right to freedom of speech. But that responsibility comes with great authority for us to make sure we get the balance right. And it shouldn't be an authoritarian approach. It should be about common sense. And I don't want, and I would never support the misinformation bill that the government's put in place. But I think Mr. Musk, who's been brought into this country and given the invitation to come here and to put his platform here, should come here with some responsibility. I just think we don't need to go to court. We don't need to fight this out. We don't need ideology. We just need some common sense. And real violence should not be put up on these platforms, because that actually normalises stylised violence. So let's just get this right. Let's everyone calm down and get this right.
Well, I take your point, David, but do you feel, though, that the government, what they're trying to do here is a form of censorship? I mean, we've seen it globally, we've seen it other parts in the world. Why can't Australians make decisions on what is appropriate for themselves?
Oh, no, I agree, but there's got to be a clear line of delineation. And I think that comes with responsibility of not having governments have to reach into it or courts having to reach into it. It's about us. It's about us as a society understanding our responsibilities of that great freedom we've been given. And we do that responsibly ourselves. And, you know, watching someone get stabbed, and particularly someone from the clergy, is greatly distressing. And I just think, and whether it be that or some innocent Australians in a shopping centre, did we really want it? When you saw a father actually blindfold his children as he took them out of that shopping centre a couple of weeks ago, that had the foresight, did not want that trauma to be put on his children, then shouldn't we understand that these platforms are far-reaching, and we've all got a responsibility to protect one another, understand that they are there, and let's go after those that perpetrate this and go after them harshly. But let's just use some common sense on this and don't get the far-reaching courts and governments reaching in. Let's just do this together with some common sense.
All right, let's move on, because Labor's Biosecurity Protection Levy, which has earned itself the nickname the Fresh Food Tax, was investigated by your party in a Senate committee today. The levy is forcing farmers who are doing it tough as it is to pay for the biosecurity risks of international importers come July 1st. David, what happened in the Senate committee today?
Well, it's just unearthed the fact that Labor don't know what they're going to do. They want to tax Australian farmers over $153 million in taxes to pay for their foreign competitors, to bring their foreign products to this country and process them through our ports to make sure there's no biosecurity risks, so that they compete on Australian shelves in Australian supermarkets against Australian farmers. All they've done is pushed up Australian fresh produce prices so that foreign prices are cheaper. Now, in what parallel universe would any government charge their own farmers to help foreign competitors bring their product to this country? When we export, farmers export to other countries, we pay to process our product through those ports to make sure there's no biosecurity risk. But instead in Australia, Anthony Albanese and Murray Watt have said, no, they shouldn't pay for it. Australian farmers should pay for it, but they have to pass it on to you. And the cost of living crisis, this mob have lost the plot. That they would say not only the farmers have to pay, but they'll have to pass it on to you when there is a pathway. And both Peter Dutton and I made this very clear in the last budget, that we will introduce a container levy where those who pose the biosecurity risk will pay the price. And that is how biosecurity should be paid and should be covered. And that's what we'll do. We'll scrap this. Australian farmers shouldn't pay this. Australian consumers shouldn't pay this for Australian produce. It should be those that bring the product to this country and pose the risk of bringing pests and disease to this country should actually pay to make sure we've checked it and done it right.
Yeah, another tax in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It's just absolutely beggars belief. Now, David, we have just seen the news that the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority Assurance Review found that you contravened laws by claiming taxpayer-funded expenses for a private trip to the Gold Coast. The Australian is reporting this evening that the IPA review said that the visit contravened Section 26 of the Parliamentary Business Resources Act. Now, I know you've paid back, we've repaid the expenses and for the flights, but what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, look, this was a return trip between sitting weeks, and most MPs return to their homes between sitting weeks. I don't normally because it's too far for me to go home. I had a family event, I came back to Queensland, and because I live in southern Queensland, I felt that I could come to two ports, Gold Coast or Brisbane. And the difference between a Gold Coast flight and a Brisbane flight is a couple $100. That's why we thought that you could go to either port. I made a mistake. IPA found that I couldn't. I could only go to Brisbane, which was a couple $100 difference. I didn't claim for any accommodation while I was home on weekend for my own personal family time, but I repaid it beyond that. The only thing that I did wrong was I came to the wrong port. I came to Brisbane rather than Gold Coast. And I admit that, and I put my hand up, but I wasn't aware that that was wrong. I thought I could come to either two because they were similar in price. And I paid not just the price of the flight of coming back, but I paid for the flight going back to Canberra and any other associated costs. But I didn't claim any nights. I wasn't there on the taxpayer. I came home to be with my family, which is what most MPs do between sitting weeks. And it's the 1 week that I actually did get to come home to see my family, because normally I have to travel and I wouldn't get home till Friday night. And have to travel Sunday morning. So it was a family event. I put my hand up and I didn't pay just what was owed to taxpayer. I paid more because I didn't want there to be any conjecture.
Well,
and that was the mistake I made. I put my hand up.
How much was that?
Well, the differential between a flight to the Gold Coast and Brisbane is a couple $100. So had I flown back to Brisbane and then found my own way to my family event, I would have saved the taxpayer about $200 difference. But I paid back both flights, which was about a couple of $1,000. I'm prepared to do that. I didn't want there to be any conjecture. I want to be upfront with the Australian people. I only travel on the tax dime to make sure that I represent the Australian people. But I do have a family, like most MPs, and on weekends between parliamentary sittings, I think most MPs want to go home and see their families. And I think Australians want us to see our families, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just that I got the wrong advice about where I could go, whether the Gold Coast or Brisbane, very similar ports, a couple $100 difference, but to make sure there was no conjecture, I paid more. Now, I'm prepared to do that because I want to be upfront with the Australian people. I have an electorate 3 times the state of Victoria, and I'm lucky to see my kids and my wife every second weekend if I'm lucky on that.
I guess, David Littleproud, I mean, people will see this, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and expenses across both sides of the political spectrum are coming under such scrutiny right now on the taxpayer dime. Do you concede it's not a good look at all?
No, so they should. But there's a realisation, if you want someone to do this job, you've got to have a family at the end of it. I mean, if you want people to put their hand up and put their name on the ballot paper, they've got to have a family that's there to support them. Now, I only came back to Queensland because I wanted to be with my family between sitting weeks. I only do that rarely. Most MPs do that every sitting fortnight. I came back to the wrong port. The difference was a couple $100. Now, I'm being up front and honest. That's what I want to be to the Australian people. I'm not taking anything more than what I wanted to, but I just wanted to be with my family. I think that's a reasonable expectation of any Australian. If you don't think it's reasonable for politicians to be with their family, then who'd want to do it? I only get to see my family, as luckily as I am, every second weekend, because my electorate is 3 times the state of Victoria. Now, most city MPs will fly back every weekend to be with their families, get to be with them, and they'll sneak home, and that's quite easy for them. It'll take me another 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours to get from Brisbane Airport to my home. Right. So am I not to see my family? Do they not have the right to see me?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, David Littleproud. We obviously just have to ask the question. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate question.
Really appreciate you joining us on the show, David Littleproud. Thank you. Well, let's move on because, as we mentioned, that showdown between Anthony Albanese and Elon Musk seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. But between all the theatrics and the mudslinging, it can be hard to decipher the important details about this dangerous censorship crusade that the Labor government is undertaking. So to understand it all and how it could impact us, let's bring in tech expert Trevor Long. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us. Look, firstly, let's start with the basics here because it seems to be getting very confusing. Can Elon Musk actually physically do what the government wants him to do and remove every single video of the church stabbing as they crop up?
I think it is possible. I think it's challenging, though, because think about how stuff spreads on the internet. One person posts a video, someone else grabs a copy and then they repost it. Now, it shouldn't be hard for X or Twitter to find that video using digital searching. But the fact is, it's not an easy task, but it should be a task that we expect of these platforms. You know, if there was a crime committed on a platform, and you know, let's be real, the New Zealand shooting massacre was committed live on social media. We needed that to be taken down. So there has to be the I guess the premise for these companies to take stuff down. The question is, what's the threshold? As David Littleproud said, what's the threshold for content that must be taken down, and what's the threshold for content that, frankly, people are allowed to post if they choose to?
Yeah, and this is exactly the problem, Trevor Long, because who can possibly decide what that threshold looks like? That's the problem.
Look, that comes down to law, and I'm not a lawyer, but it really comes down to, is it an illegal act that's being shown or committed? Is it illegal to post it? Now, actually, we probably have better freedom of speech in Australia than the Americans do. They just don't realise it. But, you know, in this case, the government is posturing essentially to try and protect citizens from seeing this content. And look, I don't have a major problem with that because it is pretty gruesome stuff. And the problem I think that we have is you can just stumble across this content. And that's the challenge we have as a society is, are we ready for that? Are we ready for our kids to be just scrolling through sports scores on Twitter and see this kind of gruesome stuff? It's a challenge that I don't think the platforms nor the government can really understand yet. And I don't think the government genuinely has the clout to take this on, because on what leg are they standing to actually ask this of Elon Musk?
Absolutely. And look, you know, the government, and it seems to have bipartisan support now to strengthen the current laws. How will this have an impact on us and the way we access our social media?
Well, I think the government's on the balance here because we had 10 years ago, we had a long conversation about net neutrality and internet filters. We don't want to be China. When you're in China, the Tiananmen Square Wikipedia page is very different to what we see here. We don't want that. We want a free and open internet. But what we do want is protection for people, especially young people, and, you know, the committing of crimes against children and terrorism acts, things like that must be protected. But I don't know how the government actually articulates that in a way that a social media platform can react to. And I think this is going to be a lot of posturing from Elon Musk because he loves a headline and he loves to fight the fight as if he's the average man in America, when he's absolutely not. He is pretty much an egomaniac billionaire. But he does have some correct points here. And by the way, he does say they have removed the content from view from Australians. So it's available still around the world, but for Australians, they can't see it anymore.
Right, all right. It's been a fascinating day, hasn't it? Trevor Long, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, coming up, the second so-called safe injecting room in Melbourne gets the sack. And from eating dog food to adopting the diet of a baby, would you believe it? The radical diets teens are following on TikTok. That's next. Well, it's the contentious report that took 4 years to compile at a price of about $270,000 taxpayer dollars. And now the Victorian government has dumped a major recommendation from former Police Commissioner Ken Lay's report, its plans for a second injecting room in Melbourne. Premier Jacinta Allen said she didn't want to waste any more time trying to find a location for the site across the CBD.
We were clear in looking at different sites across the CBD that the location needed to balance the needs of people who use drugs with the needs of the broader CBD community. And this issue of the location has been a key sticking point.
Let's bring in my panel PR Council Managing Director, Christy McSweeney, and Sky News host, James McPherson. Hi to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. James, was this the right call?
Not only was this the right call, this is the first right call I can remember from the Victorian Labor government in a long time. But do you notice that the Victorian Premier didn't make this call because she suddenly had an epiphany that maybe it's not a good idea to provide state-sponsored places for people to shoot up illegally, but rather she couldn't find anyone who wanted it in their area. No, and we've got experience with this because they've had a drug injecting room in Richmond. They placed it right next to a primary school. Parents have complained non-stop since it was there. And now the Victorian Premier wakes up to the fact no one wants one of these places near them. Business don't want it. Local residents don't want it. So it's a good decision. I'm just not sure she made it for the right reasons.
No, OK. Well, I mean, it is a good decision. As you said, the first good decision from the Victorian government. Christy, you are in Melbourne. How are people feeling there about this call today?
Look, I think everybody who frequents the CBD, workers, people who are commuters coming in and out of the Flinders Street train station vicinity on a daily basis. It is a major tourist hub. It's a major business retail centre as well. It is the gateway to the CBD of Melbourne, right there in the city. Melbourne is a great city for international tourism, international education. It was quite frankly stupid to position a heroin injecting room in that location. And then, of course, there were a number of other locations that were mooted by the government, all got various elements of support from the usual suspects. But Melbourne has been devastated from COVID. The effects of the Victorian government's decisions on retail and business in Melbourne has been devastating, and everybody is so pleased that this is just one thing that they do not have to overcome yet again after a number of decisions made by the Victorian government that disadvantage retailers in the CBD and affect tourism numbers. And of course, there's some Melbourne City Council elections coming up in October.
Wow.
I think there's a lot of polling gone on here by the Labor Party to make this decision. They don't want this one to be the catalyst of losing Labor candidates come October.
Yeah, there's always some sort of political motive involved in every single decision made, absolutely. Well, look, this is tragic because after the horrific death of young mum Molly Ticehurst, allegedly at the hands of her ex-partner, the Prime Minister has admitted more needs to be done about Australia's domestic violence crisis. This is what he said.
Once a week, a woman is dying at the hands of a partner or an ex-partner is just horrific. We need to do more as governments, we need to do more as society. We need to talk about this.
James, in this latest incident, the victim's ex-partner was released on bail 15 days before he allegedly murdered her. Is it time for a rethink, a serious rethink of bail laws?
Yeah, in that clip that we just saw, Prime Minister goes on to talk about how we need to have a conversation with young boys and with men, and all of that is true. We need to teach boys to respect women. That's the job of every father, to teach his son to respect his mother, even as he sees his father respect his wife. But the fact is, most guys aren't monsters.
No.
There are practical things that the government can do rather than demonise boys and men. They can toughen bail laws, so that if you start to threaten a woman, if you start to stalk a woman, and women can be very vulnerable, then courts should immediately, no bail for you. We take this very seriously because we have, sadly, a history of women who've met with foul play because courts have been lenient with bail. And the second thing they should do is if you breach a DVO order, there is no mercy, there is no second chance, you are immediately jailed. We can't afford to allow guys who, because these things happen incrementally, right?
Yes.
No one wakes up one day and decides to murder their ex.
No.
There's a pattern of behaviour, and as soon as this pattern is flagged and recognised, courts should deal with it very harshly. That's something practical we could do right now.
Yeah, no second chances.
Absolutely.
Just deal with it and then that's it. I completely agree. But I do take your point. I mean, not every man is a monster. Christy, but we are seeing 25 innocent women have allegedly been killed in Australia by a partner in the past 4 months alone. That in itself, though, is a shocking statistic. Do we have a domestic violence issue in this country?
These aren't new statistics, Danica, and I think that they are statistics that have been showing up for years and years and years, and perhaps we just have more focus on it. Perhaps social media has brought it into being more prevalent. And of course, in Indigenous Australia, Indigenous women have been facing these issues for decades and decades and decades with little attention. That is a point that I'd strongly like to make here. It needs to be a whole of community issue throughout regional, metropolitan and Indigenous communities. What's really difficult here in Melbourne is that 2 women, now 3 in Ballarat, were murdered. 2 of them, the alleged offenders, were men of just 22 years of age. We don't usually think of men so young and early in their adulthood committing these crimes, seemingly for no motivated reason at all, just because they committed a violent crime against women that one was known to them, one was unknown to them. That's hugely disturbing. The one thing the government has done, state governments across Australia have implemented coercive control laws, recognising that these events do not happen as a one-off. They are incremental patterns of behaviour, and I commend the New South Wales government and the Queensland government who passed that law last month in recognition of the terrible events that happened to Hannah Clark.
Yes.
So yes, there's more that we can do, but there's been a recognition that it is incremental behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're just shocking statistics, aren't they? And if this story has raised any concerns for you, you can contact the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Helpline on 1800 RESPECT. Now, let's move on. WA's Liberal leader has waged a war on puberty blockers, vowing to ban children's use of them. If elected, Libby Mettam says she'd also ban the use of cross-sex hormone treatments and surgical intervention for children under 16. James, do you think that other Liberal governments, you know, if they ever get elected again, may actually follow suit on this?
I'm shocked that they haven't already come out and said we are going to do something about this.
Yeah.
When you look at what's happening overseas, you've had the Tavistock Gender Centre in the UK closed down over concerns regarding the safety of puberty blockers. We've just had a 4-year, 388-page report handed down by Dr. Hilary Cass. She did that at the request of the National Health Service in the UK, which found that there is very scant evidence for the benefit of puberty blockers. And in Western Australia, we've got 100 children currently being treated, about 63 on puberty blockers. And it's outrageous that we're just allowing this to happen. What's even more outrageous, Danica, is the health minister in Western Australia accused the opposition leader of playing politics with children in order to satisfy extremists.
Wow.
So these days, if you believe that biology is a fixed reality, you're an extremist. Well, I tell you, the extremists are the ones who want to play with our children, and I cannot believe... I mean, credit to the West Australian opposition leader, but I can't believe every Liberal leader in the country hasn't come out and said, you elect us, we will do something to protect children from this quasi-science.
Totally. I mean, good on Libby Mettam for having the gall to come out.
Absolutely.
When a lot of people always shy away from this topic. Now, look, I've got to ask you both about this because young Aussies are being urged to trust the professionals when it comes to health or diet advice after new data found that 8 out of 10 young Aussies use TikTok for medical advice. Now, here we go. Some of the common fad diets youngsters are following are replacing all their food with baby food to lose weight, eating what's called girl dinners, small snacks instead of a regular dinner meal. But here's my personal favourite, dog food instead of meals because apparently it contains protein. Christy, I don't even know where to begin with this.
What are you talking about? I mean, who hasn't done that?
Dog food for dinner, why not?
I mean, dog food, you know. These are... TikTok sparks so many crazes from our young people, and there's another argument about how damaging it is with the infiltration of Chinese media into the devices of Australian kids. However, just on this particular topic, these crazes come up all the time. I have actually heard of the first two. They're existing Hollywood diets, so that's not a new TikTok thing. But the dog food is definitely a new thing. And if that's what kids are doing to prepare themselves for cost of living in the future when they can't buy a house, I feel very sad for them, but
Yeah,
that
we're
should
in
be
trouble.
shut down immediately.
Totally agree, James. We're almost out of time. Dog food for dinner?
This story is not about young people's health. It's about young people's education, Danica.
Yes.
What young person looks at TikTok and says, dog food diet, that sounds
Yummy,
right.
yummy.
There's a problem with our schools.
Yeah, a spot on. Christy McSweeney, James McPherson, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, stay with us. Coming up after the break, why the experts say our economy is stuck in a holding pattern ahead of the federal budget in just 3 weeks' time. Economist Warren Hogan will join me next. Well, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has indicated inflation will remain a primary focus at the upcoming federal budget. Currently, monthly inflation sits at 3.4%. Ideally, it will drop again tomorrow when March Consumer Price Index figures are released, or at the very least, stay steady. To get an expert's opinion, let's bring in Judo Bank's Chief Economic Advisor, Warren Hogan. Warren, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. What are you forecasting for tomorrow? Good or bad news?
I think the numbers tomorrow should be okay. They're probably going to come in a little bit higher than those February monthly numbers of 3.4, probably more like 3.5 to 4, somewhere in that range. We're going to see inflation in the quarter just under 1%, which is an improvement on what we've been seeing in the last couple of years, but it's still too high. We need inflation down at around 2 to 3%, preferably closer to 2.5%. And tomorrow's number probably won't get us there and probably doesn't give us much insight into whether we're going to get there anytime soon either.
No, it doesn't appear that way. I've got to ask you, Warren, because the Treasurer is warning the drivers of revenue boosts in recent years, like high commodity prices, for example, aren't likely to repeat this year. Do you agree with that?
Look, the commodity price story has been positive, but it's not delivering big windfalls like it has in recent years, indeed at various times in our last 10 years or so. What it is that is delivering the revenue is income tax increases. Because of bracket creep and the strength of employment growth in the economy, the strong population growth we're seeing with people getting jobs, their income tax receipts have gone through the roof, literally, in the last few years and continue to. So whether that's repeated in the year ahead is a big question mark, and I think they probably won't plan on that being repeated. But of course, the Treasurer has got a track record of talking down both the global economy and our economy ahead of budget. The reality is the evidence we're seeing so far this year is that things are doing well. We're generating about 30,000 jobs a month, which is way more than our long-term average. Unemployment's back under 4%, and business conditions are pretty positive. So I think we're starting to see some green shoots of recovery after the slowdown last year, and that's somewhat problematic from an interest rate point of view.
Well, I mean, it's certainly positive news, but look, let's talk about interest rates because, of course, in the midst of all this, there are fears of more interest rate hikes, despite over 1 million Australians experiencing mortgage stress. Now, as it stands, Australia's interest rate, we know, is sitting at 4.35%. But, Warren, does the RBA need to slash interest rates to try and kill inflation? I mean, how do you see this playing out now?
Well, there's certainly been a move away from this rate cut view that's emerged since sort of the summer months. It's overseas, there's less chance of seeing rate cuts in the US and in Europe. And I think here, because our interest rate's lower than in these countries overseas, if our economy does show some signs of recovery, that's going to put the RBA in a difficult position. So tomorrow's inflation numbers are important in the sense that they will give us insight into domestic inflation and whether or not they're on the right path with that. But I think you're right to point out that this story that the next move in rates is a cut is not a done deal by any stretch. And there is still a prominent risk that we may see further interest rate increases later in the year.
All right, well, we'll be watching it closely and getting your input as always. Warren Hogan, thank you so much for your time. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. Sharri will be back tomorrow night. Now here's Paul Murray.